Open any economics textbook, turn on any mainstream financial news channel, scroll through any glowing report from the World Bank or Davos. You will hear the same story repeated endlessly until it feels like common sense. They will tell you that China's rise from a desperately poor, agrarian backwater into a global economic superpower was inevitable, that it was the natural result of hard work, discipline, reform, and historical destiny finally fulfilled. They will tell you it was a miracle. They are lying to you. China's rise was not a miracle. It was not fate. It was not destiny. It was a manufacturing project. And the manufacturer was not Beijing. It was Washington, D.C. What you are about to see is not a story of foreign conquest or clever espionage. It is something far more disturbing. It is the anatomy of a self-inflicted collapse, a slow-motion geopolitical suicide. This is the story of how the United States, driven by a toxic mix of arrogance, short-term thinking, and corporate greed, deliberately built the very economic and technological machine that is now being positioned to destroy it. We didn't just lose our lead to China, we handed it over. We signed the agreements. We approved the trade deals. We transferred the technology. We shipped the factories overseas. And we financed the construction of our own replacement. This is not a conspiracy theory whispered on fringe forums. It is a matter of public record. The evidence is buried in trade agreements, declassified diplomatic cables, policy speeches, and the quarterly earnings reports of America's most powerful corporations. To understand how we ended up here standing on the edge of a new Cold War with a rival that holds hundreds of billions of dollars of American debt, manufactures the vast majority of our antibiotics, and dominates the supply chains that keep our economy alive, we have to rewind the clock. Not to 2001, when China joined the World Trade Organization, not to the 1990s, when American companies began buying up distressed Chinese assets. We have to go back further. Back to a cold day in February of 1972. Back to a single handshake that quietly sealed the fate of the American middle class. The year is 1972. The United States in 1972, a nation under strain. The Vietnam War is tearing the country apart politically, socially, psychologically. American cities are burning with protests. Trust in government is collapsing. Inflation is rising, wages are stagnating, and the post-war economic boom is beginning to sputter. Just months earlier, President Richard Nixon has done something unthinkable. He has severed the dollar from gold. The Bretton Woods system, America's post-war financial architecture, is dead. The dollar is now backed not by metal, but by confidence. And that confidence is fragile. But none of this is what truly terrifies Washington. The real fear sits thousands of miles away, stretching across 11 time zones. The Soviet Union, the USSR, is not just a rival, it is an existential threat. It has nuclear weapons capable of annihilating American cities. It controls Eastern Europe. It is expanding its influence across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. To the men inside the Pentagon and the White House, the world looks like a chessboard, and right now, the United States feels like it is losing pieces. Washington's obsession has a name: containment. Every move, every alliance, every war is viewed through this single lens. Stop the Soviets, bleed them economically, box them in geopolitically, force them to collapse under their own weight, and then one man looks at the map and sees something everyone else has missed. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's national security advisor, is a cold realist. He does not think in moral terms. He thinks in balances of power, leverage, and long games. And what Kissinger sees is a crack deep, ugly, and potentially catastrophic, running straight through the communist world. Despite what Americans are told, the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China are not allies. They despise each other. By the late 1960s, their relationship has deteriorated so badly that they are openly fighting border skirmishes along the USS Uri River. In 1969, those clashes come terrifyingly close to escalating into a full-scale nuclear exchange. Two communist giants, both armed with atomic weapons, standing on the edge of mutual destruction. To Kissinger, this is not a danger. It is an opportunity. The logic is brutally simple. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. If the United States can open relations with China, it can isolate the Soviet Union, force Moscow to divide its attention, its military, and its resources across to France. It is a master stroke of geopolitical strategy. A move so elegant it borders on genius, but it comes with a price. China will not align with the United States for free. In 1972, China is not the industrial powerhouse we know today. It is a wreck. The Cultural Revolution has devastated the country. Its economy is shattered. Its people are desperately poor. China's GDP is smaller than that of Italy. The average citizen survives on less than $1 a day. Its industry is crude, its technology obsolete, and its economy almost entirely cut off from the global system. Chairman Mao Zedong needs something badly. He needs legitimacy. He needs protection from the Soviets. But above all, he needs access to Western capital, Western technology, and Western markets. So, when Richard Nixon's plane touches down in Beijing on February 21, 1972, the media frames it as a triumph of diplomacy. A breakthrough for peace, the week that changed the world, Nixon proudly calls it. Cameras flash as Nixon shakes Mao's hand. Glasses clink as he toasts Premier Zhou Enlai. History books would later describe it as a moment of reconciliation, but look closer at what was actually exchanged in that room. The United States did not just offer diplomatic recognition. It offered something far more valuable. It offered economic mentorship. In the Shanghai Communique, the language is carefully worded, almost boring. Trade, it says, would be mutually beneficial. Cooperation would serve both sides. At the time, it sounds harmless, technical, even dull. American policymakers look at China and see 1 billion peasants. They don't see a rival, they see a market. A vast, untapped customer base that will buy American grain, American machinery, American technology for generations. They assume China will always be dependent. They think they are petting a kitten. They do not realize they are feeding a dragon. This is the first fatal error, not malice, not betrayal, arrogance. Washington convinces itself that economic engagement is not just profitable, but transformative. That capitalism itself is a Trojan horse, that once China tastes Coca-Cola, blue jeans, and Western consumer culture, political freedom will inevitably follow. Make China rich, and China will become free. It feels inevitable, it feels moral, it feels smart. It is catastrophically wrong. The belief was elegant in its simplicity. If you expose an authoritarian society to free markets, free trade, and Western consumer culture, political freedom will inevitably follow. Prosperity would create a middle class. The middle class would demand rights. Rights would lead to democracy. It had worked before. Post-war Japan, West Germany, South Korea, Taiwan. Each time, capitalism arrived first, democracy followed. To American policymakers, this was not ideology, it was historical law. China, they believed, would be no different. They were wrong. What Washington failed to understand, what it never truly grasped, was that the Chinese Communist Party had no intention of repeating the mistakes of the Soviet Union. The USSR had tried to control everything, including the economy. It had collapsed under the weight of its own inefficiency. Beijing was studying that failure carefully. The party did not fear markets, it feared losing power. And those are not the same thing. The Chinese Communist Party did not want democracy. It did not want political liberalization. It wanted growth without surrendering control. It wanted wealth without accountability. And most of all, it wanted time. While American leaders convinced themselves that capitalism was a Trojan horse that would smuggle freedom into China, the party was preparing a far more effective strategy. Use the horse, strip it for parts, then build a fortress with the pieces. The Chinese leadership understood something the West did not. Markets can be controlled, guided, and weaponized. Capitalism does not automatically produce liberty. In the wrong hands, it can produce something far more dangerous, an authoritarian system with unlimited resources. And that realization arrives with a change in leadership. By the late 1970s, Mao Zedong is dead. The chaos of the Cultural Revolution has exhausted the country. In his place rises a man who will shape the next half-century of global history. Deng Xiaoping. Deng is not a true believer. He is a pragmatist, an engineer of power, not an ideologue. His most famous quote becomes the blueprint for modern China. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice. Ideology is irrelevant. Results are everything. Deng understands a brutal truth. Communism cannot work without capital. Without foreign investment, technology, and access to global markets, China will remain poor, unstable, and vulnerable. So he makes a calculated gamble. He opens the door. In 1979, China establishes special economic zones, controlled laboratories where capital is allowed to exist under strict party supervision. Shenzhen, then nothing more than a quiet fishing village across the border from Hong Kong, is chosen as an experiment. It is here that history quietly shifts, because on the other side of the Pacific, American corporations are desperate. The 1970s in the United States have been ugly. Stagflation has crushed profits. Labor unions are powerful and expensive. Environmental regulations are tightening. Strikes are frequent. Costs are rising. Margins are shrinking. Then China makes an offer that is impossible to ignore. No unions. No meaningful environmental regulations. No labor protections. And a workforce of hundreds of millions willing to work for pennies. To American executives, it looks like salvation. To China, it is something else entirely. A transfer of power. Factories begin to move. Slowly at first, textiles, shoes, toys, low-end manufacturing that seems harmless. Politicians wave it away. These are sunset industries, they say. America will move up the value chain. Design, innovation, and high-tech work will always stay at home. But there is a catch. There is always a catch. China does not allow foreign companies to simply sell goods into its market. If you want access, you must build there. If you want to build there, you must partner with a Chinese firm. This is the joint venture model. On paper, it looks reasonable. In reality, it is brilliant. American companies send their blueprints. They send their machinery. They send their engineers and managers to train Chinese workers. They teach them how to run assembly lines, how to manage logistics, how to enforce quality control, how to build modern supply chains from scratch. The United States does not just export jobs, it exports know-how. And unlike factories, knowledge never comes back. In the 1980s, the process is slow. China is still poor, its infrastructure is weak, its workforce inexperienced, but the foundation is being poured, brick by brick. By 1985, something subtle but important happens. The U.S. trade balance with China, once nearly non-existent, begins to tilt. The deficit is tiny, just $6 million. A rounding error. No one panics, but a precedent has been set. The relationship is no longer equal. The parasite has found its host, and it is not letting go. By 1989, the illusion is still alive, but it is cracking. For a decade, the United States has told itself a comforting story. Engagement is working. Trade is opening China. Exposure to the West is slowly civilizing the regime. Prosperity will soften authoritarianism. Then, in the spring of that year, the lie is exposed live on television. Tens of thousands of Chinese students flood Tiananmen Square. They are young, educated, and optimistic. They hold banners calling for reform, transparency, and basic political rights. Many of them believe naively that the Communist Party will listen. The world watches, then the tanks roll in. On June 4, 1989, the Chinese Communist Party answers peaceful protest with brute force. Soldiers fire into crowds. Bodies are crushed beneath armored vehicles. The exact death toll is still unknown, buried beneath decades of censorship, but the message is unmistakable. Power will not be shared, control will not be surrendered. The party will rule at any cost. For a brief moment, moral clarity pierces the fog. Western governments are outraged. Sanctions are imposed. Diplomatic ties are frozen. The experiment appears to be over. The conclusion seems obvious. This is a brutal authoritarian regime. We cannot do business with them. We should not do business with them. This is the moment the United States should have walked away. But it doesn't, because money has a short memory. American corporations mobilize immediately. Lobbyists descend on Washington. Their argument is ruthless and effective. If we leave, they say, Europe will stay. If we leave, Japan will stay. If we leave, we lose access forever. Engagement, they insist, is the only realistic option. And inside the White House, that argument finds a willing audience. President George H.W. Bush is not just sympathetic, he is personally invested. He had served as the U.S. envoy to China. He knows the leadership. He believes he can manage them. He believes isolation will only make things worse. So, despite the blood on the pavement in Beijing, China's most favored nation trading status is quietly renewed. The sanctions remain, but they are weak, symbolic, and temporary. Business continues. This is the second fatal error. Not ignorance, not idealism, greed over strategy. By the early 1990s, the world changes again. The Soviet Union collapses. The Cold War ends not with a bang, but with an implosion. The strategic justification for supporting China vanishes overnight. The enemy Kissinger wanted to isolate no longer exists. Logically, this is the moment the United States should reassess everything. The mission is accomplished. The board has changed. The rules should change with it. Washington should have looked at Beijing and said, "The deal is over. You want access to our markets. You play by our rules, or you don't play at all." Instead, America does the opposite. It doubles down. The 1990s usher in an era of unprecedented American confidence. The internet is exploding. The stock market is soaring. The United States is not just a superpower, it is the hyperpower. History, some declare, has ended. In this atmosphere of triumphalism, caution feels unnecessary. Warnings are dismissed as pessimism. Critics are labeled protectionists or relics of a bygone age. And it is in this moment when restraint would have mattered most that Washington makes the final, irreversible decision to fully integrate China into the global system. By the late 1990s, the decision has already been made in spirit. All that remains is to formalize it. The Clinton administration frames the argument with soaring language. Bringing China into the World Trade Organization, they say, is not just about economics. It is about values, about binding China to international rules, about pulling an authoritarian state into a system it cannot help but be transformed by. President Bill Clinton stands before the American public and delivers the same promise his predecessors have made for decades, only now with more confidence. Trade will bring freedom, information will break censorship, prosperity will weaken authoritarianism. He famously mocks the idea that the Chinese Communist Party could ever control the internet, comparing it to trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. The audience laughs. Beijing does not. They do not try to nail the Jell-O. They build a wall around it. But while politicians speak in abstractions about liberty, corporations are running the numbers. And the numbers are overwhelming. Throughout the 1990s, a new term enters the business lexicon, the China price. It means one thing: no competitor can survive without it. Walmart realizes it can undercut every rival by sourcing from China. Nike discovers it can manufacture shoes at a fraction of the cost. Apple learns it can scale production faster and cheaper than anywhere else on Earth. If you don't move to China, your competitor will. If your competitor moves, you die. It becomes a race to the bottom. And here is the part that rarely appears in the history books. This is no longer just about toys, textiles, and cheap consumer goods. In the late 1990s, The U.S. government quietly relaxes restrictions on dual-use technologies, systems that can be used for civilian purposes but also have obvious military applications. Satellite technology, advanced aerospace materials, supercomputers, precision navigation systems. American companies are allowed to launch satellites on Chinese rockets because it is cheaper. Boeing sells advanced aerospace composites. Scientific exchange programs train the very engineers who will later design missile guidance systems and hypersonic weapons. All of it is justified in the name of engagement. By 1999, the results are undeniable. The U.S. trade deficit with China has exploded to $68 billion per year. The warning Ross Perot issued back in 1990 to the gent-sucking sound of jobs leaving America is no longer hypothetical. But it isn't coming from Mexico. It is coming from across the Pacific. Factories in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania begin to close. Entire communities hollow out. Assembly lines go silent. Skilled workers are discarded as inefficient. Wall Street shrugs. Cheap Chinese goods keep consumer prices low. Low prices keep inflation down. Low inflation allows the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates low. Low rates inflate asset bubbles. It is a perfect, toxic feedback loop. America sells its industrial base to buy flat-screen TVs paid for with debt that China is increasingly happy to purchase. As the millennium approaches, the final barrier still stands. China's trade status must be renewed every year. Tariffs and quotas still apply. There is still, technically, a cage. That cage is about to be removed. In the year 2000, Congress votes on whether to grant China permanent normal trade relations. Labor unions scream. Human rights activists scream. Manufacturing communities beg Washington to stop. But lobbyists write checks louder than any protest. If the 1970s were the courtship, and the 1990s the engagement, then 2001 is the wedding. On December 11, 2001, China officially joins the World Trade Organization. Champagne corks pop in Washington. CEOs congratulate themselves. Politicians declare victory. The American public is told this is the final triumph of capitalism. Bind China to the rules, they say, and it will have no choice but to play fair. They are lying, or worse, they are stupid. China does not see the WTO as a rule book. It sees it as a Trojan horse, and once inside the gates, the real shock begins. Once China enters the World Trade Organization, the transformation is no longer gradual, it is violent. This period comes to be known as the China shock, a term economists use because no softer word will do. Between 2001 and 2011, the United States loses an estimated 3.7 million manufacturing jobs. And these aren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They are paychecks. They are mortgages. They are entire towns erased from the map. Factories in the Midwest don't simply shut down. They are dismantled. Machines are unbolted from the floor, packed into shipping containers, and sent to Guangdong and Shenzhen. What took decades to build is erased in months. Communities that once produced steel, cars, appliances, and electronics are hollowed out. Addiction rises. Life expectancy falls. The social fabric tears, but the stock market keeps climbing, and in Washington, that is what matters. While the public fixates on cheap sneakers and plastic toys, something far more dangerous is happening in the background. The Chinese Communist Party is thinking in decades. They understand that the 21st century will not be one with coal mines and blast furnaces. It will be one with microchips, electric motors, batteries, and precision weapons. And to build all of that, you need one critical input: rare earth elements. Back in 1992, Deng Xiaoping makes a statement that should have set off alarms across the Pentagon. The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths. This is not a boast. It is a declaration of strategy. At the time, the United States is actually the world's leading producer of rare earths. The Mountain Pass mine in California supplies much of the global market. American firms control the technology. The expertise exists. But rare earth mining is dirty, it is expensive, and it comes with serious environmental costs. So, when China begins flooding the market with state-subsidized rare earths at impossibly low prices, American companies make the rational decision, at least in the short term. They shut down. Molycorp, the operator of the Mountain Pass mine, cannot compete. The mine closes, the expertise withers. The supply chain dissolves, the trap snaps shut. By 2010, China controls roughly 97% of the global supply of rare earth oxides. But mining is only half the story. The real power lies in processing, and China dominates that too. Today, China produces more than 90% of the world's permanent magnets. Why does that matter? Because you cannot build a modern economy or a modern military without them. Consider the F-35 Lightning II, the most advanced stealth fighter ever built. It contains hundreds of kilograms of rare earth materials. The magnets in its control systems, the coatings on its stealth canopy, the sensors that guide its weapons. For years, those materials came almost entirely from China. Let that sink in. The United States was building weapons designed to potentially fight China using materials that China could cut off with a phone call. And this is not theoretical. In 2010, after a territorial dispute with Japan, Beijing quietly halts rare earth exports. No missiles, no warships, just paperwork. Japanese industry panics. Toyota, Honda, Sony all grind to a halt. Prices spike by over 1,000% in months. Japan backs down. The captain is released. It is a warning shot to the world. China has a nuclear option for the global economy, and America has no shield against it. Even today, the Mountain Pass mine has reopened, but the ore is still shipped to China for processing, because we forgot how to do it ourselves. While China is quietly cornering the market on the future of technology, it is also buying something else, something far more immediate. The present. In 2008, the American financial system implodes. Wall Street's reckless gambling collapses the housing market. Banks fail, credit freezes, the global economy teeters on the edge of total collapse. The U.S. government needs trillions of dollars immediately to bail out the system it allowed to rot from the inside. The question is simple: who has the money? China does. For decades, China has been running massive trade surpluses with the United States. The dollars Americans spend on cheap goods do not disappear. They accumulate, and Beijing recycles those dollars into U.S. Treasury bonds, hundreds of billions of them. China becomes America's banker. This creates a relationship so toxic it borders on absurdity. The United States cannot afford to anger China, because if Beijing dumps its U.S. debt, interest rates would spike and the dollar could collapse. At the same time, China keeps buying that debt to keep its own currency artificially cheap, ensuring its exports stay competitive and American factories keep dying. Each side is holding the other hostage, a codependent spiral, a suicide pact. By the early 2010s, the shift in Beijing is unmistakable. The old strategy, hide your strength, bide your time, has run its course. China is no longer content to grow quietly inside the system. In 2012, a new leader takes power, Xi Jinping. Unlike his predecessors, Xi does not believe China should wait. He looks at a United States drowning in debt, paralyzed by political polarization, and hollowed out by deindustrialization, and he sees an opening. The time for patience is over. Under Xi, China launches a new phase of state-directed capitalism, crystallized in a single policy, Made in China 2025. This is not about competing in the market. It is about owning the market: robotics, aerospace, green energy, artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing. The goal is simple: replace foreign technology with Chinese technology and then dominate global supply chains so completely that no rival can function without Beijing's permission. While this is happening, the United States is distracted, fighting endless wars in the Middle East, arguing about culture, consuming entertainment, assuming the foundations of its power are permanent. They are not. For 40 years, Washington tells itself the same comforting lie. China is a partner, a stakeholder, a responsible participant in the global order. Around 2013, that illusion finally shatters. This was never a marriage, it was a cage match. For decades, Americans repeat the same reassurance to themselves. China can copy, but it cannot innovate. China can assemble, but it cannot design. China can manufacture, but it will always depend on Western brains. Designed in California, assembled in China, that slogan becomes a psychological shield. A way to believe that outsourcing production does not mean outsourcing power. It is the final, fatal arrogance, because China does not just assemble products. It studies them, every factory transferred, every supply chain shared, every joint venture approved. All of it becomes a classroom. Chinese engineers do not merely follow instructions. They reverse engineer, they improve, they scale. They absorb not just how to build products, but how to build entire ecosystems, component suppliers, logistics networks, research pipelines. By the 2010s, the shift is impossible to ignore. China does not just manufacture smartphones. It builds the networks they run on. It does not just assemble routers. It dominates telecommunications infrastructure. It does not just participate in globalization. It begins to shape it. The clearest symbol of this transformation has a name most Americans had never heard 10 years earlier: Huawei. In the early 2010s, Huawei is dismissed as a cheap Chinese equipment vendor. By the end of the decade, it has become the backbone of global telecommunications. Its 5G technology is faster, cheaper, and easier to deploy than its Western competitors, and that is when Washington finally wakes up. Because whoever builds the world's communication infrastructure does not just carry data. They see it: phone calls, bank transactions, government communications, military signals. The realization hits Washington like a punch to the gut. If Huawei controls global 5G, Beijing could have a backdoor into the digital nervous system of half the planet. The response is panicked. The United States bans Huawei, sanctions it, pressures allies to do the same. The goal is clear-cut the company off from advanced semiconductors and kill it. On paper, the strategy should work. It doesn't. In 2023, Huawei releases a new smartphone powered by a 7-nanometer triple level of sophistication U.S. sanctions were supposed to make impossible. Somehow, despite export controls, China has found a way. The message is chilling: they don't need us anymore. The student has surpassed the master, and if that were the end of the story, it would already be bad enough. But the real confrontation is not about phones or trade tariffs. It is about a small island, just 100 miles off China's coast, Taiwan. If the United States and China go to war, it will not begin over tariffs or trade balances. It will begin over Taiwan. On a map, Taiwan looks small, a narrow strip of land sitting just 100 miles off the Chinese coast. For decades, it has existed in a gray zone recognized by some, claimed by Beijing, protected indirectly by the United States. But Taiwan is not important because of its land. It is important because of what it builds. At the center of Taiwan's strategic value is a single company, TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. TSMC does not just make chips, it makes the chips. Roughly 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors are produced in its factories. These are not interchangeable components, they are the brains of modern civilization. They power your smartphone, your car, your laptop, your internet infrastructure, your missiles, your fighter jets. There is no backup. No second factory waiting in the wings. TSMC is the single most critical industrial asset on Earth. China understands this. Beijing does not want Taiwan because of history or nationalism. Those are useful stories, but they are not the core reason. China wants Taiwan because whoever controls advanced semiconductor production controls the future of computing, artificial intelligence, and military power. It is a kill switch. If China seizes Taiwan, it gains the ability to choke off the world's supply of advanced chips. Entire industries would grind to a halt overnight. Financial markets would seize. Militaries would struggle to operate. The global economy would not slow, it would stop. For decades, the U.S. Navy acted as the guarantor of Taiwan's safety. American aircraft carriers sailed through the Taiwan Strait without fear. The assumption was simple. No one could challenge U.S. naval power. That assumption is no longer safe. China now possesses the largest navy in the world by ship count. Its shipyards operate at a scale the United States cannot match. While Washington debates budgets and struggles to repair aging vessels, China launches new warships year after year, destroyers, amphibious assault ships, submarines, aircraft carriers. At the same time, China develops weapons specifically designed to neutralize America's greatest advantage: carrier-killer missiles, hypersonic glide vehicles. Weapons built not to fight fair, but to keep U.S. forces out of the fight entirely. The unthinkable becomes plausible. The United States funded the rise of the very military designed to sink its fleets, and the battlefield does not stop at the Pacific. The war is already here. This conflict is not confined to aircraft carriers and missile ranges. It is not something that will only happen over there. It is already happening here, in your pocket, on your phone. One of the most effective tools of modern power is not a weapon at all. It is an algorithm. TikTok, a Chinese-owned platform, becomes the primary source of news, entertainment, and cultural influence for an entire generation of Americans. Millions download it voluntarily. Billions of hours of attention are poured into it. And with that attention comes influence. The algorithm decides what you see, what you don't see, what outrages you, what numbs you, what divides you. This is not about silly dances. It is about shaping perceptions, attention spans, and political instincts at scale. It is about normalizing chaos, amplifying division, and quietly gathering data on a population in real time. It is, quite possibly, the most successful psychological operation in history, and it required no invasion. China's presence is not just digital, it is physical. Chinese entities have been buying American farmland, sometimes thousands of acres at a time. In several cases, that land sits uncomfortably close to sensitive U.S. military installations in places like North Dakota and Texas. It is in the skies. In February 2023, a massive Chinese surveillance balloon drifts across the entire continental United States. It floats over nuclear missile silos in Montana. It passes near military bases. And for days, the U.S. government does nothing. The public watches it on television. It is eventually shot down, but the damage is done. The message is clear: we can touch you, we can watch you, and you are paralyzed. This is not just espionage, it is signaling, a demonstration of reach and confidence, proof that the balance has shifted. And that brings us to the end of the story, or perhaps the beginning of the reckoning. So here we are, after half a century of decisions, compromises, and self-deception. The picture is finally clear. The United States spent 50 years and trillions of dollars building modern China. We opened our markets, we transferred our technology, we trained their engineers, we moved our factories offshore. We ignored intellectual property theft, we looked the other way on human rights abuses. We did it because Wall Street wanted cheap labor. We did it because corporations wanted higher margins. We did it because politicians wanted legacies instead of consequences. And above all, we did it because we believed we were untouchable. The China price was never just the price of a t-shirt or a flat-screen TV. The real price was our industrial independence. The price was our strategic autonomy. The price was our national security. The price was the future. For years, Washington insisted that China was a partner, a stakeholder, a responsible participant in a shared global order. That illusion is gone. Around the mid-2010s, the mask finally fell. This was never cooperation, it was competition. And now, the competition is no longer hidden. The United States is finally trying to respond. The CHIPS Act is passed to rebuild semiconductor manufacturing at home. Alliances in the Pacific are being strengthened. Supply chains are being reconsidered. The country is, belatedly, waking up, but history is unforgiving. Empires rarely fall because they are invaded. They fall because they hollow themselves out. They fall because greed replaces strategy, because comfort replaces vigilance, because arrogance replaces foresight. America did not lose its dominance overnight. It traded it away, piece by piece, deal by deal. Quarter by quarter, we built the dragon, we fed the dragon. And now, for the first time in a century, the United States is staring into the eyes of a rival that looks disturbingly familiar. The question is not why China acted in its own interest. The question is why we let it happen. Is it too late to turn this around? Can the United States rebuild what it dismantled? Or is the Chinese century already inevitable? That answer has not been written yet, but the clock is ticking.